The aroma of pecorino romano and black pepper hung thick in the air of our Brooklyn brownstone, a warm, savory cloud that usually signaled the end of a long, productive week. Friday nights were sacred in the Vance apartment. Ethan's famous Casio e Pepe, the vinyl player spinning Miles Davis, and the comfortable, companionable silence that comes from 7 years of successful marriage. We had built this life brick by expensive, meticulous brick, the salvaged antique chandelier, the carefully curated art, the undeniable ease between us. It was a masterpiece of domesticity, and I, Elara Vance, was its proud architect. I sat perched on the high stool at the kitchen island, nursing a glass of chilled, crisp Sancerre. My laptop was closed, my editor hat hung up until Monday morning. Ethan, my ambitious, handsome, 35-year-old husband, was fully immersed in the culinary ballet. He wore his favorite faded t-shirt, flour dusted across his dark hair, his brow furrowed in concentration as he whisked the pasta water into the grated cheese. He looked exactly like the man I fell in love with, focused, passionate, and completely devoted to the task at hand, whether it was designing a new glass facade for a corporate tower or achieving the perfect emulsion for a Roman pasta dish. "Are you sure the pepper is fresh enough, Elara?" he murmured, his voice laced with the slight anxiety only a chef at home understands. "I think I might need to grind a little more." He rarely looked up when he was in the zone, a habit I had always found endearing. It was a sign of his deep capacity for singular commitment. I smiled, the perfect, supportive wife. "It smells divine, darling. Don't overthink it. It's perfect because you made it." I watched the way his biceps flexed under the cotton as he turned the crank of the pepper mill. It was a moment of absolute, predictable perfection. This was our life, our routine, the solid ground beneath my feet. There were no cracks in the foundation, no hidden flaws in the blueprint. I felt a wave of contentment so powerful it almost felt dull. Safe. Secure. It was then the phone buzzed. It lay on the marble countertop, just inches from my elbow, a black rectangle announcing its presence with a coat, bright chime. Ethan's hands were slick with oil and cheese sauce. He glanced at the screen from under his messy fringe, then back at the pot, not worried in the slightest. "Can you check that for me, honey? My hands are a mess." Probably just Leo confirming tomorrow's golf time. I set my wine glass down with a delicate, controlled clink. The movement was slow, deliberate. I picked up the phone. The screen flashed the notification, Serena. Unknown number. And beneath the name, the short, sharp sentence that tore my masterpiece to shreds. "I miss you." The world did not spin. It did not explode into fire and brimstone. Instead, everything narrowed to the size of a pinprick, focusing only on those 3 simple, devastating words. "I miss you." They weren't an accidental or a quick work question. They were intimate, possessive, and spoken in the language of clandestine relationships. The sheer, casual audacity of the message sent a cold, clinical shock straight through my system, freezing every single emotion. My gaze snapped up to Ethan. He was still staring, oblivious, his back to me, the picture of domestic devotion. A fleeting thought, a wild, irrational panic, told me to drop the phone, to smash it, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But a deeper, colder part of my brain, the editor in me that corrects every errant comma and dangling modifier, took control. No. I was not going to have a screaming match while he was trying to achieve al dente perfection. That was the predictable, amateur response. The one he would have prepared for, the one he could manage with feigned remorse and a rehearsed apology. He wanted drama, he would get theater. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't open the message to read the rest of the thread. I didn't need context. The title of this chapter of my life had just been written, and it wasn't a romance. It was a thriller, and I was taking over the narration. My heart, though beating like a frightened bird, was already hardening into ice. Ethan finally turned, a victorious look on his face. "Okay, Perfection achieved. Who was it? He asked, reaching for a clean dish towel. I looked down at the phone, my lips curling into a smile so wide and genuine it felt like a betrayal. I quickly typed out my own 3 words, a calculated, perfectly weighted countermove, an invitation he certainly had not authorized. Come over, I typed. Then, with a casual flourish, I added, we're having cacio e pepe. I hit send. I placed the phone back precisely where I had found it, screen down, hiding the digital evidence of my radical pivot. I looked up at Ethan, my eyes clear and untroubled. It was just Leo. I lied smoothly, the word rolling off my tongue as easily as the truth used to. He just wanted to confirm the golf time, but he texted the wrong number, a coworker named Serena. I told him we were just about to eat. My smile tightened, becoming a commitment. God, it smells incredible, Ethan. I can't wait. I slid off the stool, feeling the immense, terrifying power of having just changed the course of our lives, and possibly Serena's, with 3 simple, perfect words. I knew she was going to come. And I was going to be waiting. The half-hour wait felt like an hour-long stage performance where I was the only audience member, watching my unwitting co-star, Ethan, fumble through his final prep. The silence in the kitchen, once companionable, was now a vacuum of impending doom, though only I could feel the pressure dropping. Ethan, completely oblivious to the invitation I had extended, hummed softly as he tossed the creamy pasta, adjusting the seasoning with a casual flick of his wrist. It was an excellent rendition of his signature dish, perfectly rich and peppery, which only made me feel a deeper, colder sense of resentment for the fraud he was presenting. I had regained my composure completely. The initial shock had been replaced by a quiet, searing rage, channeled into laser-focused control. I moved with a graceful, almost unnatural calm, setting the vintage silver cutlery and crystal wine glasses on the dining table. I pulled out a 4th place setting. Oh, why not? I announced lightly, meeting Ethan's gaze with a flawless smile. Let's treat ourselves to the formal settings tonight. It feels like a celebration. Ethan paused, wiping his hands on a pristine linen towel. A celebration of what, exactly? Getting through the week. He chuckled, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a slight anxiety. He'd been anxious all week, actually, but I had attributed it to the massive corporate project he was supposedly finalizing. Now, I understood the source of his nervous energy, the precarious balancing act of his infidelity. Yes, darling, I confirmed, leaning in to give him a chaste kiss on the cheek, which felt like touching a block of dry ice. A celebration of our wonderful life. And perhaps, a small professional victory for you. Didn't you say you closed the Meridian deal today? He swallowed hard and nodded, the color draining slightly from his face. My smile only widened at his discomfort. The smell of basil and warm bread filled the apartment, but the air felt thin and sharp, ready to break. I opened a second bottle of Sancerre, deliberately choosing the one we'd been saving for our anniversary, pouring a generous amount for myself. I needed the wine, not for blurring the edges of my reality, but for sharpening them. I was watching my life burn down, and I wanted to remember every spark. Then, the doorbell rang. The chime echoed through the apartment like a death knell. Ethan froze, his eyes wide and panicked, staring at the front door as if an armed SWAT team had arrived. He knew that chime. He had been expecting only me, only the ritual. His fear was delicious, a powerful affirmation of my choice. Were you expecting anyone, honey? I asked, maintaining a tone of innocent curiosity. I tilted my head, waiting for his reaction. He stammered, unable to form a coherent word. He looked utterly terrified, his composure shredded. And no. I didn't. Who could that be? He whispered, his voice catching in his throat. He desperately tried to wipe the flour from his face with the towel, a futile, pathetic gesture. I stood, smoothing down the simple silk of my dress. Well, let's find out. Unless you're hiding someone? Go on, open it, chef. Our dinner guest has arrived. I walked past him, a theatrical beat behind, and watched the horrifying realization dawn on his face as he opened the door to reveal Serena. Serena was younger, professionally polished, and visibly confused. She stood there, clutching a small, designer handbag, dressed in business casual clothes that suggested she'd rushed straight from the office, or perhaps a clandestine rendezvous. Her eyes, wide and startled, darted between Ethan's frozen form and my perfectly composed figure standing just behind him. Ethan? What? I thought I texted Leo? Is this a joke? She whispered, her confusion giving way to dawning horror as she saw me. Serena. What a surprise. I chimed, stepping forward, extending my hand with the warmth of a long-lost friend. My grip was firm and dry. Ilara Vance. Ethan's wife. Please, come in. We were just about to sit down. You must be freezing out there. I completely bypassed Ethan, pulling Serena inside with an undeniable momentum. Ethan finally found his voice, a strangled croak. Serena, you shouldn't have, you can't. Nonsense, darling, I interrupted, dismissing Ethan with a casual wave. I invited her. She texted the wrong number, remember? And I thought, why not? We always talk about your brilliant coworker. We simply must celebrate that Meridian deal. I'm so glad you could make it, Serena. I steered Serena toward the kitchen, my arm linked casually through hers, my internal monologue screaming a warning. Serena was pale, visibly trembling, locked between the terror of exposure and the social pressure of my overwhelming hospitality. I could practically smell the panic radiating off her. Ethan stood rooted by the door, completely emasculated, unable to interfere with the performance I was running. He knew, intuitively, that to stop me now would be to admit everything instantly. I poured Serena a glass of wine, forcing it into her hand. Sans sir. It's lovely. Ethan made his famous cacio e pepe. Please, sit. Tell us all about the office buzz. I directed her to the fourth setting, placing her directly opposite me at the table, with Ethan sandwiched between us. It was a perfect arrangement for a passive-aggressive firing squad. The dinner was served. Let the show begin. The dinner table was a three-person monument to unspoken deceit and psychological warfare. The cacio e pepe, usually a source of pleasure, tasted like ash in my mouth, yet I ate every single bite with enthusiastic praise. Ethan sat rigid, only moving to shovel small, tasteless bites into his mouth, avoiding all eye contact. He was a portrait of a man drowning in plain sight. Serena, however, was the primary target of my charm offensive. I directed my every question and compliment toward her, making her the center of attention while meticulously avoiding any mention of her original "I miss you" text. I spoke of professional admiration, of how much Ethan valued her contributions, and how vital she was to the firm's success. Ethan tells me you're an absolute workhorse, Serena. I purred, swirling the wine in my glass. Especially when it came to that tricky data retrieval for the Meridian bid. It was crucial, wasn't it, honey? I glanced at Ethan, who nearly choked on a strand of pasta. He managed a strained, weak cough. Serena just blinked, her veneer of professional calm completely dissolved. She was lost in a fog of fear and confusion. She didn't know if I was a master manipulator who knew everything, or a clueless, eccentric wife who truly thought she was hosting a spontaneous work dinner. The ambiguity was my most potent weapon. It was a lot of late nights, Serena managed, her voice thin. Oh, I know all about late nights, I replied, my eyes locking onto hers. They can be so draining. It makes it hard to maintain boundaries, doesn't it? When you spend all your time with the same people, things can get blurry. The words, casual on the surface, were heavy with implication. Ethan flinched, his hand tightening around his fork handle. The toxic atmosphere became too much for her. Serena suddenly pushed her chair back, a sharp, scraping sound against the polished floor. I'm so sorry, Ilara. Ethan. This was a lovely dinner, truly, but I just remembered I have an early flight tomorrow. I really have to go. Already? I asked, feigning disappointment as I stood. But we barely got to know each other. Well, you simply must text me so we can properly coordinate a ladies' lunch soon. We have so much to talk about. I walked her to the door, my hand resting gently on her back. I watched her practically run out of the apartment and down the hallway, fleeing the scene of my calculated kindness. I closed the door silently, turning the lock with an unnecessary, slow click. The moment the sound of her frantic footsteps faded, the perfect, supportive wife evaporated. I leaned against the door, the mask of pleasant composure dissolving into a silent, volcanic fury. The silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Ethan was still sitting at the table, surrounded by the remnants of his delicious, ruined dinner. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. So, I said, my voice dangerously soft, the sound amplified in the vast silence. I think we can dispense with the small talk now, can't we, darling? He slowly rose, pushing his hands through his already messy hair. Ilara, please. Let me explain. It was nothing. I swear to God, it was a mistake. Oh, I know it was a mistake, Ethan, I agreed, moving slowly toward the table, my eyes narrowed. The mistake was you texting her from the kitchen while I was 5 feet away. The mistake was thinking you could bring that filth into this home and that I wouldn't notice. He tried to approach me, but I held up a hand, a gesture of absolute, non-negotiable stoppage. Don't touch me. Sit down. You owe me more than a pathetic, generic I'm sorry, it was nothing cliché. You owe me the entire script. Tell me when it started. Tell me how often. Tell me why you decided this life, this beautiful, hard-won life, was worth throwing away for 3 words from a coworker. He sank back into the chair, defeated. The confession was already written on his face, but he still tried to haggle for the truth. He claimed it happened only once, after a late-night work session, that the text was just her trying to get his attention for a follow-up meeting. His excuses were threadbare, cheap lies he'd spun for himself, not for me. My composure finally cracked, not into hysterics, but into ice. I'm not a fool, Ethan. I'm your wife. I read your body language for a living. I edit prose for a living. I see the misplaced commas and the dangling modifiers in your behavior. Your phone was suddenly glued to your hand. You started complimenting my hair again. You were overcompensating. Tell me the truth. Now. My demand hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The silence was his acknowledgement of defeat. Ethan's confession, when it finally tumbled out, was a carefully curated narrative designed to absolve him of all but the minimal required guilt. He insisted it was only a 6-week fling, a brief lapse caused by unbearable stress at work and Serena's aggressive advances. He characterized her as the predator and himself as the overwhelmed, passive victim who had strayed but was now firmly back on the path of marital fidelity. It was repulsive. It was never about her, Ilara. It was a distraction. I was so focused on this Meridian bid, so afraid of failing you, of failing myself, that I just checked out emotionally, he pleaded, his head in his hands. He looked genuinely remorseful, but I understood his remorse was for getting caught, not for the betrayal itself. I listened, silently, my arms crossed, watching the performance with the detachment of a critic. I offered no comfort, no tears, no shouts. My stillness unnerved him more than any outburst could have. I was recording the scene in my mind, noting the lies, the omissions, and the convenient villain he had created out of his coworker. When he finished his tearful, self-pitying monologue, I fixed him with a cold stare. Done? Is that the whole draft? Because it needs significant editing, Ethan. The motivation is weak, The supporting characters are two-dimensional, and the resolution is far too tidy. What do you mean? He asked, lifting his tie-streaked face. I mean, I don't believe you, I stated simply. You're an architect, Ethan. You don't do anything without a clear, calculated structure. Your infidelity isn't a careless doodle, it's a design element. And this isn't about stress. This is about leverage. And I am going to find out what that leverage is. I stood up and began clearing the plates, the clinking of ceramic on ceramic sounding like small, metallic protests. I moved with purposeful energy, scraping the remnants of his perfect meal into the trash. We are not having a divorce yet. Not tonight. Not until I understand the why of this. Not until I have a clear, itemized ledger of what you have cost me and what you have gained. You're not leaving? He asked, bewildered by my lack of immediate flight or rage. No. Where would I go? This is my home, Ethan. I designed this life. You are the one who is currently sleeping in my apartment, on my terms. I paused, turning to face him, the dish sponge still in my hand. You will stay here. You will sleep in the guest room. And you will tell me everything, truthfully, whenever I ask. If I catch you in one more lie, one more omission, I will not only file for divorce, I will dismantle your entire career, brick by miserable brick. It was the quiet threat that silenced him completely. My revenge would not be hot and messy. It would be cold, meticulous, and structural, mirroring his own profession. I needed to see the full scope of the disaster before initiating the rebuild. He was shocked, perhaps even relieved that I hadn't exploded, but he hadn't yet grasped the true danger he was in. He was dealing with an editor now, and I was marking up his life with a bright red pen. Now, go to the guest room, I commanded, pointing toward the end of the hall. And tomorrow morning, you will change your password to something simple and memorable, and you will give it to me. I need to review your documents. All of them. I added the last part with a chilling finality. I was no longer his wife. I was his auditor, his judge, and his executioner. And the execution was going to be televised. The next morning, Ethan left for the office looking haggard and defeated. He had sheepishly handed me a slip of paper with his new, ludicrously simple password, a desperate attempt to appease me. The second the door clicked shut, the clock started. I was alone with his laptop and my mission, to stop editing the manuscript of his affair and find the real story hiding between the lines. I logged into his phone and his cloud drive, immersing myself in the digital residue of his betrayal. His quick, 6-week narrative crumbled immediately. I found messages from 8 months ago, subtle at first, a late-night query about a presentation, then casual jokes, then increasingly intimate exchanges hidden within corporate chat threads. The I miss you text wasn't a one-off. It was just the latest in a long, predictable series of communications. The affair wasn't 6 weeks, it was 8 months. It wasn't a mistake, it was a sustained choice. I scrolled through months of texts, feeling not heartbreak, but intellectual disgust at the sheer predictability of their communication. Their language was full of private jokes and thinly veiled flirtations, but what caught my attention was the recurrent, anxious discussion about a favor Serena was doing for him, and repeated references to getting the numbers clean for the Meridian bid. This was the crack I was looking for. The affair wasn't just physical, it was transactional. Ethan didn't risk his life for lust, he risked it for professional advancement. That made him not just a cheater, but a calculating opportunist. I began cross-referencing their chat dates with files in his main work directory. I found a string of emails exchanged between Ethan and a senior, difficult client, referencing proprietary data that seemed to come from an outside source. Serena, as an administrative assistant in the adjacent department, would have had access to certain internal, sensitive reports that Ethan's architecture department should not have. The pieces began to click into place. The Meridian contract, the one he was so proud of, the one that won him the internal firm award he was supposed to receive at the upcoming gala, was not secured purely by his genius design. It was secured, or at least heavily aided, by stolen or improperly obtained competitive data. Serena's favor was the data. The affair was the currency. He hadn't risked his life for love or lust. He had risked it for a corporate edge. The realization brought a deep, satisfying chill. The pain of betrayal receded, replaced entirely by the cold, exhilarating thrill of the hunt. This wasn't just a divorce case now, this was leverage. I had moved from the emotional battlefield of a betrayed wife to the strategic landscape of a corporate spy. I spent the rest of the day creating a meticulous, dated spreadsheet. I logged every suspicious message, every unusual file access, and every cross-reference to the Meridian bid. I was creating a dossier, a definitive document that, when presented correctly, would not only destroy his marriage but incinerate his career. When Ethan returned home, expecting tears or recriminations, I simply greeted him with a polite nod. Dinner is in the fridge. I finished reviewing the digital evidence. Your timeline was significantly inaccurate, Ethan. I suggest you start telling the truth about the professional side of this arrangement. Or I will find it myself, and I promise you will not like the final report. He looked at me, terror in his eyes, realizing he was trapped, not by an emotional woman, but by a chillingly rational one. The Vance apartment transitioned into a state of highly organized, polite warfare. We shared the same physical space but existed in separate emotional dimensions. Ethan stayed in the guest room, a desolate space he'd furnished with all the comfort of a corporate crash pad. I remained in our bedroom, the sanctuary he had contaminated, enjoying the vast, uninterrupted expanse of the king-sized bed. We spoke only in transactional, neutral language. The dry cleaning is ready. Do you need the car today? I saw the firm's gala invitation came in the mail. It was a cold, quiet war fought with passive agreements and perfect manners, making the atmosphere heavier than any shouting match could have. My strategy was simple: psychological attrition and information extraction. I knew enough to frighten him, but not enough to execute the plan. I needed the smoking gun, and I intended to make him hand it to me without even realizing he was doing it. I started taking an intense interest in his work. Over breakfast, I would casually ask about the legal ramifications of the Meridian bid, or how the firm handled proprietary competitive analysis. Darling, you mentioned that data point was crucial, I'd say, stirring my coffee. Did Serena help retrieve it? She seemed so dedicated. I'm just curious, is it ethically permissible for an administrative role to access that level of competitive intelligence? Is there an internal audit structure? He would go rigid, the toast halfway to his mouth. It's fine, Ilara. Standard procedure. We had the requisite sign-offs. Don't worry about my firm's compliance. His denial was too rapid, too defensive. I logged the reaction. I also began subtly praising his rival at the firm, a sharp, aggressive architect named Marcus Thorne. Did you see Marcus's article in Architectural Digest? He's such a visionary. It must be difficult for him, being passed over for the Meridian Award when his portfolio is so strong. You really have to stay competitive to keep him contained, don't you? This tactic drove him to distraction. He started working longer hours, not to see Serena, but to protect his reputation from the unseen enemy, me. He became paranoid, believing that I might be speaking to someone, anyone, who could compromise his position. His fear was palpable, and it made him sloppy. He started leaving his laptop open, his desk slightly disorganized, hoping I would see nothing of consequence. But I saw everything. I saw the desperate need to prove his success was legitimate. The psychological pressure was deliberate. I needed him to doubt my motive. Was I plotting divorce or merely curious about his career? By making his professional life the focus, I masked my actual intent, which was total destruction. I accepted the gala invitation for both of us, RSVPing with a flourish. It's your big night, Ethan. "I wouldn't miss seeing my husband receive the recognition he earned for the Meridian bid," I announced. He looked relieved, mistaking my agreement to attend as a sign of forgiveness, or at least a temporary truce. He failed to realize that the invitation wasn't for a reconciliation. It was for the final curtain call. The crucial piece of evidence wasn't in a file named Serena or Fair, but buried deep in a financial folder related to the Meridian bid's preliminary accounting, a series of wire transfers and expense reports that were vaguely titled third-party consultant fees. I spent an entire afternoon tracing the digital path of the Meridian bid. The project required highly specialized, proprietary data on regional infrastructure costs, data that would normally take a competitor months, or millions, to compile. Ethan's firm won the contract because he had those numbers fast, and his design proposal was perfectly tailored to them. The wire transfers, 3 modest, but consistent, payments, were made to a shell corporation that, upon cross-referencing public records and Serena's vague chat references to a friend's cousin, turned out to be registered in an offshore location but managed by a partner in Serena's family network. The consultant fees were not for consulting, they were payoffs for stolen information. Serena hadn't just used her internal access, she had leveraged a family connection to secure sensitive, non-public data from a rival firm's subcontractor, giving Ethan an illegal advantage. The affair was the personal hook, but the corporate espionage was the true crime. This was no longer an ethical violation. This was potentially a felony that could cost him his license, ruin his firm's reputation, and land him in serious legal trouble. The affair was the trigger, but the leverage was this financial trail. I had the smoking gun, meticulously documented in my own spreadsheet, complete with dates, amounts, and shell company names. I had transformed from a passive victim into a strategic operative, building a case that was airtight, undeniable, and infinitely more satisfying than simple divorce proceedings. The irony was not lost on me. Ethan, the man who built towers of glass and steel, had built his success on a foundation of sand, held together by a cheap transaction and a secret affair. My immediate next move was contingency planning. I downloaded all evidence to an encrypted drive and sent a copy to my personal lawyer, along with a detailed explanation. I ensured my actions were legal and protected me fully from any blowback. My priority was stability and leverage in the coming divorce, and this documentation guaranteed both. That evening, I casually mentioned to Ethan that I had been thinking about changing my retirement investment strategy. "I'm thinking I need to find a financial advisor who understands high-risk, high-reward scenarios, like corporate mergers or even hostile takeovers," I mused, watching his reaction. He visibly paled. He didn't know what I knew, but he knew I was dangerous. He knew I was thinking in terms of leverage and destruction. He was trapped in the cage he'd built for me, and I was holding the key. 3 days later, an email landed in my inbox, bypassing the firm's server and landing directly in my personal account. The sender was Serena. The subject line was chillingly formal, regarding last Friday night, a request for clarity. The email was a masterpiece of desperation and confusion. She apologized for her abrupt departure and pleaded for a meeting, stating she was deeply confused by my invitation and needed to understand where we stand regarding Ethan and the firm. She was clearly paranoid, terrified that I had orchestrated the dinner to lure her into a trap, which, of course, I had. She wrote that Ethan had been silent and withdrawn since the dinner, refusing to discuss the situation, which made her fear for her job and his professional standing. She desperately wanted reassurance that I wasn't going to cause trouble. I smiled faintly. Cause trouble? She had no idea the scale of the trouble I was about to cause. This was perfect. She was cracking under the pressure, and I needed her testimony, indirectly given, to confirm Ethan's primary role in the financial fraud. I drafted a reply immediately, adopting the persona of the weary, heartbroken wife who was reluctantly reaching out to the other woman for shared commiseration. I was careful not to mention the cheating directly, focusing only on the ambiguity of the work situation. Dear Serena, I wrote. That evening was difficult for me too. I am trying to understand the extent of Ethan's recent behavior, both personally and professionally. I know he has been under incredible pressure regarding the Meridian contract. I would appreciate a chance to meet, outside the office, just to talk as two adults caught in a confusing situation. I am trying to piece together the professional puzzle he created. Could you meet for coffee downtown tomorrow? I hit send. By framing the meeting as a joint attempt to understand Ethan's professional pressure, I invited her to confirm the transactional nature of their bond and, crucially, to minimize her own culpability by painting Ethan as the ambitious ringleader. The response was instantaneous. Yes. Thank you, Ilara. Thank you so much. I set the time and location, a quiet, high-end cafe in the financial district, far from our Brooklyn neighborhood, a place where business secrets are routinely traded over overpriced lattes. I needed her to believe she was confessing to a confidant, not an interrogator. I needed her to confirm the final detail, that Ethan had initiated the proposal to acquire the data and that the affair was part of the exchange. I was meticulous in my preparation, choosing an outfit that screamed vulnerable yet classy, a soft cashmere sweater and simple gold jewelry. I was going to play the role of the damaged woman seeking comfort, but my mind was already 3 moves ahead, setting the ultimate trap for my husband. The cafe was buzzing, but we were seated at a quiet corner table, bathed in the soft morning light. Serena arrived looking genuinely distraught, dressed in a sleek suit that couldn't hide the anxiety in her eyes. I greeted her with a gentle, commiserating hug, a gesture that immediately broke down her defenses. Thank you for coming, Serena. I know this is awkward, I started, my voice carefully modulated to sound weary and wounded, yet forgiving. I chose my opening line with precision. I just need to understand Ethan. He's been so focused on his career, I fear he may have made some desperate choices. Serena immediately latched onto the narrative of Ethan's desperation. That's exactly it. He was under so much pressure from the board, Ilara. He was terrified of losing the Meridian bid. He was talking about how it was his only chance to make partner. I nodded slowly, letting the silence hang. And the data? The proprietary information that secured the bid. She hesitated, finally realizing the true subject of the meeting. It was complicated. Ethan was the one who suggested it. He said he needed an edge. He knew I had a cousin who worked in a certain administrative capacity at the rival's supplier. He pressured me, Ilara. He kept saying it was the only way he could succeed, and that if he succeeded, we would all be taken care of. Taken care of? I repeated, making the phrase sound hollow and transactional. Serena flushed, twisting the napkin in her lap. Yes. He implied that my future at the firm would be secure. And he was just so charming. So desperate for me to help him. I thought I was essential to his success. The affair, it started after he made the request for the data. It felt like part of the agreement, honestly. A bonus. There it was. The explicit confirmation I needed. Ethan initiated the fraud. The affair was a transactional reward. She had just verbally confessed his motive and his role as the architect of the corporate crime. So you helped him commit a professional violation because he made you feel important? I asked, my gaze soft, yet probing. I was stupid, Ilara. I was flattered. He made me feel like I was the only person who understood his ambition. He manipulated me, honestly. I never wanted to hurt you, she confessed, her voice cracking with genuine remorse. Her regret was for her own situation, but it served my purpose perfectly. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers, a gesture of faux solidarity. Thank you, Serena. You've given me a lot of clarity. I think I understand the kind of man my husband has become. I'm going to protect myself now. You should too. I did not mention the Shell Corporation or the wire transfers. I simply let her believe she was a peripheral victim. As I left the cafe, I felt a strange mixture of disgust and elation. I hadn't cried or shouted. I had simply gathered the final, necessary piece of evidence. Ethan was not just a cheating husband, he was a corporate criminal who used women as tools. Now, I could begin building his tomb. With Serena's confession securing the motive and the means, the wire transfers securing the proof, my revenge shifted from passive data collection to active deployment. I had built the case, now it was time to build the cage. My target was not just his marriage, but his public identity. The annual firm gala, where he was slated to receive the Architect of the Year award for the Meridian bid, was the perfect venue for the exposure. The stage, the audience, the business journalists, it was a theatrical setting worthy of the drama he had created. I started by contacting Marcus Thorne, Ethan's direct rival, under the guise of an anonymous tipster using a burner email. Marcus was known to be ruthless and deeply connected to the firm's executive board. I simply sent him a cryptic message: the Meridian win is structurally unsound. Check the consultancy fees, specifically 3 payments made to a shell entity related to a partner's administrative cousin. The evidence is on the firm's server, but you have to know where to look. Look before the gala. I gave him just enough information to initiate an internal panic without implicating myself. Marcus, hungry for a chance to expose Ethan and secure his own promotion, would do the immediate, messy digging. My next step was to ensure the information reached the press. I contacted a business journalist I knew tangentially through my freelance editing work, someone known for high-stakes corporate exposes. I requested a discreet meeting to discuss a major industry scandal involving an upcoming award recipient at the firm's gala. Again, I used ambiguity, emphasizing the public interest and the ethical breach, promising irrefutable evidence at the event itself. I spent the next few days monitoring Ethan's increasing nervousness. He was tense, constantly checking his work email, sensing a storm brewing but unable to pinpoint the source. The Cold War between us intensified. He was desperate for my affection, believing my agreement to attend the gala meant I was close to forgiving him. "Ilara, I know I messed up, but I'm fixing this," he told me one evening, hovering nervously in the doorway of our bedroom. "This award, it means everything. It's for us. Once I make partner, we can put all this behind us." "I'm sure you'll earn every bit of recognition you get, Ethan," I replied, not looking up from the book I was pretending to read. The double meaning in my words was clear only to me. He mistook my chilling sarcasm for acceptance. I had meticulously planned every detail of the final act, the exact moment, the target audience, the delivery method of the evidence. I was not going to give him the dignity of a private confrontation. He had made his betrayal public by bringing Serena into our home. I would make his destruction equally public. The stage was set, the cast was ready, and the final scene was only days away. The evening of the firm's annual fundraising gala arrived, a glittering, high-stakes affair held in a massive ballroom overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The air was thick with the scent of money, ambition, and expensive perfume. I was dressed in a stunning, severe black dress, chosen specifically to look like a woman who was mourning something essential, yet completely in control. Ethan, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looked every bit the successful, golden boy architect. He was beaming, slightly nervous, constantly smoothing his tie. He held my hand tightly as we navigated the crowded room, introducing me to senior partners and clients. He was parading me as proof of his stability and success, believing my presence was his shield. "This is my wonderful wife, Ilara. She's my rock," he announced to the firm's CEO, pulling me close. "A beautiful rock," the CEO commented, completely oblivious to the explosive payload I was carrying. I smiled, my eyes locking onto the CEO's. "Thank you. I specialize in structure, making sure the foundation is sound." The subtle threat was aimed solely at Ethan, who squeezed my hand warningly. I saw Marcus Thorne across the room, looking pale and furious, locked in a tense conversation with the firm's general counsel. My anonymous tip had clearly ignited an internal firestorm. They were scrambling, but they hadn't moved fast enough to stop the award ceremony. The momentum of the event was already carrying them toward the inevitable stage appearance. I also spotted my contact, the business journalist, discreetly positioned near the media riser, observing the drama unfolding around Marcus Thorne. The pieces were all in place. As the main course was served, the head of the board began his introductory speech, praising the firm's vision and integrity. Ethan fidgeted nervously, whispering to me, "This is it, Ilara. We did it." "You did it, Ethan," I corrected him softly, my gaze fixed on the podium. My heart was no longer racing, it was a cold, steady drumbeat. I excused myself, heading toward the women's restroom, but instead made a subtle detour to the press area. I caught the eye of the journalist, giving a slight, nearly imperceptible nod. The journalist discreetly slipped out of the room. I returned to the table just as Ethan's name was announced. The applause was thunderous. He stood, kissed me on the cheek, a kiss I endured with complete detachment, and walked toward the stage. He was at the pinnacle of his achievement, just moments before his complete and utter fall. As he reached the podium and accepted the heavy, shining crystal award, I took out my phone. I accessed the encrypted drive and, with 3 quick taps, sent the entire dossier, the wire transfers, the Shell Corporation details, the time-stamped chat logs, to the business journalist and, simultaneously, to the email address of the firm's chairman of the board, whose contact information I had meticulously researched. The deed was done. The truth was airborne. Ethan stood at the podium, basking in the warm glow of the spotlight, the heavy crystal award clutched in his hand. He began his speech, talking about hard work, dedication, and the importance of teamwork. He even paused to give me a saccharine, public acknowledgement. "And to my wife, Ilara, your belief in me made all of this possible." It was the final, unforgivable insult, the public lie that sealed his fate. As he spoke the words, the room began to shift. I watched as the chairman of the board, a formidable, imposing man, glanced at his phone, his face instantly draining of color. The general counsel, still arguing with Marcus Thorne, received the same email and froze mid-sentence. A wave of silent, panicked communication spread through the head table. Ethan continued, oblivious to the fact that his professional reputation was dissolving in real time. He was talking about integrity and passion, the very qualities he had sacrificed for this moment. Then, the journalist made his move. He approached the head of the board, holding up his phone to display the damning documents. The murmur started low, a ripple of confusion that quickly grew into a roar of shock. People were looking at their phones, forwarding the scandalous emails. Ethan, halfway through a sentence, faltered, realizing the applause had died and all eyes were on the chaos near the head table. "And I believe that with this contract, our firm will," he trailed off. The chairman, fueled by fury and the need for immediate damage control, snatched the microphone from the podium. His voice, amplified to a jarring level, cut through the noise. "I apologize to our distinguished guests. We have just received some extremely disturbing information regarding the procurement of the Meridian contract. Mr. Vance, I need you to step down from the stage immediately. This event is concluded." The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan stood paralyzed, the trophy suddenly too heavy for his hands. He looked utterly bewildered, then his eyes, wide and horrified, found mine. He saw not the loving wife he had left at the table, but the cold, calculating woman who had orchestrated his collapse. He opened his mouth to protest, but the CEO and 2 security guards were already ushering him off the stage, pulling him into a side room. The ballroom erupted into pandemonium, the end of the gala forgotten, replaced by the frenzied exchange of corporate gossip and scandal. I remained seated, taking a small, elegant sip of my champagne. My job was done. I had exposed the fraud, ruined the performance, and ensured that Ethan Vance was known for what he truly was, a calculating criminal, not an acclaimed architect. The marriage was dead, but my power was finally realized. The aftermath of the gala was a swift, brutal cleanup operation. Ethan was immediately suspended and then formally fired the next morning, pending an internal and external investigation into corporate espionage and financial fraud. The Meridian contract was frozen. His beautiful career, the edifice he had built on lies, had been demolished in less than 5 minutes. He was sent home, utterly defeated, while I was out filing the divorce papers, strategically leveraging the corporate scandal as grounds for a swift, advantageous settlement. The tables had turned completely. He needed my silence to mitigate his legal disaster. I needed his signature to secure my future. When I finally returned to the apartment, he was sitting on the living room sofa, still in his rumpled tuxedo, staring blankly at the antique chandelier. He looked broken, his ambition and arrogance stripped away. "You did this," he accused, his voice hoarse, finally looking at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Yes, Ethan," I confirmed, removing my coat and hanging it neatly in the closet. "I did. You brought a transaction into our marriage, and I simply processed it. You used Serena to steal data and secure a professional win. You were willing to sacrifice your fidelity, your ethics, and my happiness for a piece of crystal and a promotion." He stumbled to his feet. "But why this way? Why not just file for divorce? Why burn my entire life to the ground?" I met his gaze, my expression utterly devoid of emotion. "Because you didn't just cheat, Ethan. You compromised my home. You polluted my sanctuary. You treated me like a convenience, an anchor you could rely on while you pursued your own reckless ambition. You thought I would cry and disappear. You underestimated the quiet woman who proofreads contracts for a living. You are insane, Ilara. You are cruel." "No," I refuted, shaking my head slightly. "I am an editor. Your life was a flawed draft, and I simply provided the final, necessary revisions. You ruined my life by making me feel small and betrayed. So I took yours, publicly, definitively, and legally, to ensure that you can never inflict that damage on anyone else. And to ensure my own financial stability in the process." I handed him a manila folder. "The divorce papers. They are already notarized on my end. Sign them, and I will instruct my lawyer to keep the most egregious details of the financial fraud separate from the public divorce file. You walk away with a tarnished reputation, but perhaps you keep your freedom. Refuse, and I will ensure the full weight of the investigation lands squarely on you, complete with a detailed timeline of your manipulation of Serena." He stared at the folder, then at me. The realization dawned on him. I had beaten him at his own strategic game. I was the better architect of destruction. I walked past him, heading toward our bedroom, my bedroom, closing the door firmly. I had won the Cold War. The divorce proceeded with the cold, efficient speed of a corporate liquidation. Ethan, facing the imminent threat of legal action from his former firm and potentially the government, was a desperate, pliable man. The leverage I had secured with the corporate fraud documents made the negotiation a formality, not a battle. My lawyer, initially surprised by the detailed dossier I provided, quickly understood the gravity of the situation. We were not merely dividing assets, we were negotiating silence and mitigating a felony. Ethan quickly signed the papers, ceding the apartment, a significant portion of his liquidated assets, and generous alimony, a payment he desperately needed to cover the mounting legal fees stemming from his professional scandal. He was utterly broken, his once imposing figure reduced to that of a defeated, desperate man. Serena, having been implicated and then used as a witness in the firm's investigation, quickly disappeared from the city. I learned she had left the industry entirely, her reputation destroyed by her association with Ethan's downfall. She was collateral damage, but a necessary casualty of his greed. The final meeting with Ethan took place in our lawyer's conference room. It was brief and silent. He signed the final documents, his hand trembling. He didn't look at me until the very end, when the papers were sealed and the marriage legally dissolved. "Did you ever love me, Ilara?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked at the ghost of the man I had married, the talented, ambitious fraud. "I loved the man I thought you were. The man who cared about structure and integrity," I told him honestly. "But I love the power of having exposed the truth even more. You gave me a terrible story, Ethan, and I simply chose my own ending." He left the conference room without another word, walking out of my life and into a future defined by disgrace and debt. I remained, signing the last few papers regarding the deed to the apartment. I felt no joy, no triumphant rush, only a profound sense of closure and the quiet relief of complete emancipation. I had protected myself, and I had punished the betrayal with the exact, measured severity it deserved. My clean slate was secured by his ruin. 6 months later, the Brooklyn brownstone felt vast and silent now. Ethan's absence wasn't a hole in my life, it was a renovation. I had repainted the guest room, transforming the former war zone into a sun-drenched library, filled with books and the quiet industry of my freelance editing business. The antique chandelier still hung in the dining room, but now it sparkled for me alone, illuminating a table set for one. I sat at the kitchen island on a quiet Friday evening, the very spot where I had intercepted the text message. I was not cooking cacio e pepe. I was drinking a glass of the same crisp Sancerre, and scrolling through my own clean, private phone. I had no one to account to, no behavior to analyze, no lies to edit. I had been contacted by my former lawyer 2 weeks ago, who informed me that Ethan had settled his legal issues, avoiding prison but effectively blacklisted from the architecture community. He was doing consulting work in a completely different state, a pale shadow of the man he once was. He was no longer my problem. Sometimes, I reflected on the speed and precision of my reaction. That split second, the decision to type "come over," was the single most defining action of my life. It wasn't about revenge in the heat of passion, it was about strategic necessity. I had to gain control of the narrative before he could write me out of it. I had always been an editor, a connoisseur of structure and logic. I edited essays for clarity, contracts for loophole protection, and now, I had edited my own life for absolute integrity and self-preservation. I learned that my deepest strength was not my capacity for love or forgiveness, but my chilling capacity for control. The novel of my life had a dramatic, terrifying climax, but the resolution was peaceful and utterly satisfying. I was free of the lie, free of the dependence, and financially secure to build a future defined entirely by my own choices. I closed my laptop, the click echoing in the spacious quiet. Outside, the city lights sparkled, the countless windows a map of millions of complicated, messy lives. Mine was no longer messy. It was clean, sharp, and perfectly composed. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out over the skyline, a beautiful, complicated structure I could finally appreciate without being suffocated by the ambition of the man who built it. I raised my glass slightly, to the view, and to myself. The greatest act of self-love is sometimes the most destructive.